Disrupting our built-in biological clocks can disrupt our microbiome as well and lead to metabolic syndrome, metabolic breakdown. So this is associated with things like insulin resistance, excessive body fat storage. The list goes on and on and on. Every single one of our cells has a built-in biological clock that's controlling all of our physiological behaviors. Now, the term circadian rhythm or the circadian timing system might sound a little bit like a scientific urban myth. Like, we can't really have clocks inside of our cells, can we? That just sounds so outlandish. We can't really be synced up with all of nature and the environment around us. That sounds a little bit far-fetched, but in reality, it is one of the most true things about human beings and really all of life on the planet. We all have these nocturnal and diurnal patterns and we're synced up with nature. But the thing about humans is that we can cause proactive disruption to these internal clocks. And let's dig in a little bit deeper and talk about what these clocks actually do. The circadian or biological clocks that exist within each and every one of our trillions of cells. Number one, they control the release of a vast array of our hormones and neurotransmitters. All right, our biological clocks are determining when certain hormones and neurotransmitters are getting released in our bodies. All right, so the production and release of things like testosterone, of human growth hormone, are heavily influenced by what time of day it is. All right, we're going to talk more about all of these things in this episode. Also, our circadian/biological clocks control our digestive function, including rate of nutrient absorption, speed of food transit throughout the gastrointestinal tract, elimination, and more. Our digestive ebb and flow, the movement of our system, of food moving through our system, is heavily influenced by what time of day it is. All right, this is why oftentimes we don't get urges to go and take a lay deuce or a number two or go poop during the night. You know, when we're sleeping, we don't have this driving need to get out of bed to go and release the Kraken. All right, that usually doesn't happen. And again, this is because the ebb and flow of our digestive system is controlled by these internal clocks in our cells. All right, so digestive function is also controlled by our circadian clocks. Also, the behavior of our microbiome itself is heavily controlled by our circadian clocks. And in addition to this, we've got to understand that the trillions upon trillions of bacteria that we have in our bodies and on our bodies have circadian clocks as well. It's not just our human cells. We have upwards of 4 times or even more bacteria cells that live in and on our bodies that are controlling and influencing an abundance of different functions that bring us health. You know, there's a symbiotic relationship there when things are in balance, but our bacteria cells have circadian clocks as well. All right, so this is very important to understand. As a matter of fact, a recent study cited in the journal Nature Reviews Endocrinology states, quote, disruption of the circadian system can alter microbiome communities and can perturb host metabolism, energy homeostasis, and inflammatory pathways, which leads to metabolic syndrome. All right, so disrupting our built-in biological clocks can disrupt our microbiome as well and lead to metabolic syndrome, metabolic breakdown. So this is associated with things like insulin resistance, excessive body fat storage. The list goes on and on and on. Not understanding that a major culprit in our society today is the disruption of how our bodies and our eating times, our sleeping times are synced up with nature and how that can throw off the whole machine. Also controlled by our circadian clocks is our blood pressure. Our blood pressure changes throughout the day as well based on what time it is. Thermal regulation, right? So this is our body's management of our temperature. That changes throughout the day. You know, we just know about this 98.6 degrees, like that's where we're supposed to be all the time. That's not true. Our temperature fluctuates and changes dramatically throughout the day. And as a matter of fact, in the evening, we have a natural drop in our core body temperature that helps to facilitate our sleep quality. All right, so there's a natural shift and change in our body temperature that's regulated by these biological clocks. Also, our sleep itself, our sleep efficiency is controlled by these circadian clocks within our cells. Also, muscular strength and reaction time. Our strength and reaction time changes based on what time of day it is, based on these circadian clocks. Also, our reproductive cycles And the production of sex hormones is heavily influenced by what time of day it is. As I mentioned before, testosterone, for example, testosterone is one of those things that is really just kind of going down throughout the day, unless we're engaging with some things that can give a little bit of a boost to testosterone, like lifting some heavy weights, for example. But that testosterone is generally going to be dropping throughout the day. There's like a rhythm to it. And when we go to sleep, it's kind of like plugging in your electric car or filling up your testosterone gas tank, because that's when testosterone levels start to increase again. All right, so our circadian clocks are controlling our reproductive cycles and the production of sex hormones. And if we think about this from a meta perspective, we zoom out and see, where do we actually associate and agree? We have a social agreement that our sex hormones are influenced by the environment and the time on the calendar, the time of day, and where we are at in relationship to, this so-called moon cycle is with the menstrual cycle with women. We have a social agreement that this is true, but we just ignore the fact that this is really based on how we're interacting and connected to the environment and the world around us. It truly is influencing our hormonal cycles. It's literally called a cycle. And it's every month, this thing is happening on rotation. It's automatically lined up, but we can throw that off based on the way that we live our lives, of course. And many women have experienced that, where different things, maybe traveling, maybe stress, fill in the blank, can throw off our cycle, the reproductive cycle. And I'm saying our because men have cycles too. It's just a much different version of what that looks like, because also it's not socially discussed about male reproductive cycles, but that is a real thing as well. First and foremost, smart intermittent fasting improves metabolic function. One of the most incredible things about smart intermittent fasting is that it initiates hormonal changes that make stored body fat more accessible. Data published in the peer-reviewed journal Obesity states that employing intermittent fasting is like flipping a, quote, metabolic switch that shifts the metabolism from fat creation and fat storage to mobilization of body fat in the form of free fatty acids and fatty acid derived ketones to be used for fuel. So this process is enabling our body to actually access the reserves that most of us here in the United States, we've got about 242 million of our citizens are overweight or obese, that we're carrying around a lot of reserves already, and we're constantly bringing food in. Our bodies don't get a chance to go and use those reserves and break that down. And we talked about this with Dr. Sylvia Tara on a classic episode of the Model Health Show, really looking at the science of fat and digging in on that subject as well. Now, if we understand this, that we're able to now access our stored body fat more easily, this highlights another study here. This was conducted by researchers at the University of Copenhagen, and it found that intermittent fasting is able to quickly reduce insulin resistance and nullify the effects of insulin-created roadblocks that stop fat from being released from the fat cells. And their study also revealed that intermittent fasting has some significant effects on our vital satiety hormones. So again, this shouldn't be hard for us, because it's just getting in touch with what our genes are expected to do, what we've been doing for, centuries upon centuries upon centuries as human beings. And so it has a lot to do with our satiety hormones and us feeling good even when we're not eating. Research published in the journal Endocrinology reports that intermittent fasting can improve the function of satiety-related hormones like neuropeptide Y, while supporting fat loss and retaining lean muscle mass. This is the big one. Because a startling percentage of people who lose weight through conventional calorie restriction regain their lost fat and find it exceedingly harder to lose weight over time. And a huge metabolic player in this conundrum is the loss of their body's valuable lean muscle mass. So to say lean and muscle mass is kind of a repeat, because muscle mass in and of itself is lean tissue. But we've got to understand that when we lose muscle mass, muscle is very expensive for our bodies to carry. And it really is this kind of metabolic machinery that we carry around. And muscle is also a reservoir for very potent hormones that help to regulate our metabolism. And the list goes on and on and on the benefits of having more muscle in our frame. But the more muscle we're carrying, the more caloric expenditure that we have automatically. Our resting metabolic rate is going to be higher for this version of ourself that has a significant amount of muscle mass versus a version of ourself that has, 20% less, 25% less muscle mass. We're going to be just burning more calories at rest and when we're doing stuff. All right. But multiple studies now are really affirming this and sharing this data that haphazardly cutting calories, this caloric restriction paradigm that we have, and not understanding the quality of food, circadian rhythms, and all these other aspects, sleep and how our sleep affects our metabolism, just haphazardly cutting calories, we're losing a significant amount of our muscle mass when we do that haphazardly. But a way that we are able to retain our body's muscle mass is through circadian nutrition, circadian fasting. All right, so improving our metabolism overall, improving fat loss, but also retaining our lean muscle. That's the key. And this is why folks find it so difficult to keep weight off after crash diets, is that we're losing muscle, which sets us in a disadvantage, a metabolic disadvantage. All right, so we want to retain our muscle mass. And we know that this circadian fasting, smart intermittent fasting, is one way that is clinically proven to do that. But also during that fasting window, we'll just say again, the researchers had folks go from 15 sporadic hours a day of eating just to 12, for example. So that's just maybe you finish your last meal of the day at, say, 7:30 p.m. And then you have your first nutritional intake, your first meal at 7:30 a.m. That's 12 hours. That's not even that big of a deal if you think about it, because our fasting window also includes our sleep. All right. And there's a growing amount of data now also demonstrating how eating late into the evening, because this is one of the things that, again, seems a little bit like fitness and nutrition gossip, but eating late in the evening is going to prevent weight loss or significant weight loss. It's not always 100% the case, for sure. There's nuance here. But in general, what's happening is eating late into the evening creates some significant disruptions to our sleep quality. All right, sleep efficiency, which our sleep is a major controller of our metabolism. All right, and if we're already in a state where we're overweight or obese, when we eat a meal, we're getting a significantly higher increase in cortisol levels. All right, because there's a little bit of a stress associated with eating food, because your body has to be top line. Your immune system is primarily located in your gut. About 70% of our immune system is located in our gut. And so they have to be front line, interacting and working on is what just came into to our body safe. What do we do to get everything where it needs to be? It can be a stressful event, but it can also be beautiful when things are in balance. So we know that there's a higher propensity towards higher cortisol levels when we eat, if we're overweight or obese. And then that just kind of creates a vicious circle, because cortisol is sort of an antithesis of melatonin. If our cortisol levels are getting pushed up, it's going to push melatonin down. And inherently, that's just one way it's going to affect our sleep quality. And plus, just by the nature of eating a meal, a lot of energy has to go there into digestion. It's a very energy intensive process of taking food, because this is a really powerful like aha moment. When you eat something, it's going to become you. It's going to become human tissue, right? It is a very complex, amazing process. We don't even fully understand yet, but we know that it's the biggest energy demand for the average person is to digest that food that they've eaten. All right, so it's taking energy away from rest and recovery from our sleep. So having a little bit of some barometers there with not eating too late into the evening. It doesn't have to be 100% of the time either. That's the other part. So it's giving us some flexibility and some freedom and not being neurotic about it, but at the same time, what is going to be best for us overall. All right, so, but in addition to that, during that fasting window, that doesn't mean you can't have anything. There's an entire section that I have in Eat Smarter talking about some of the fasting mimicking nutrients in foods that actually help the benefits and encourage even more benefits through specific foods and nutrients consumed during your fasting window. All right, now when talking about smart intermittent fasting, it's not just in the metabolic domain, it's also in the health of our brain and cognitive function as well. Intermittent fasting, smart intermittent fasting, can stimulate the production of new brain cells. And this is according to data published in the Journal of Molecular Neuroscience. Not only does intermittent fasting stimulate the creation of new brain cells, it also makes the neurons that we already have work better. And numerous studies have revealed that intermittent fasting increases our levels of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which BDNF is a powerful assistive force in the healthy development and survival of our brain cells. All right, we don't get that many. We know that we do have neurogenesis processes today. And primarily, this is seen in the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, but many different areas of the brain, we are not just on a whim creating new brain cells. We really need to take care of the brain cells that we have. And so this is another way that intermittent fasting is found to increase the production and release of brain-derived neurotropic factor to help to protect the survival of our brain cells. It's also been shown to improve neuroplasticity, enhance cognitive function, and protect our brains from a myriad of diseases. All right, so again, we talk even more about this in Eat Smarter, and it's a critical part of our overall health and performance is understanding these things, that anything that's going to be good for our metabolism is also very likely going to be good for our cognitive performance, very likely going to be helpful in slowing down the aging process, helping to prevent diseases, and so much more. So let's talk a little bit about that as well, because one of the most amazing benefits of smart intermittent fasting is the impact that it has on inflammation, for example. And we just did a masterclass episode really breaking down how inflammation works and the mechanisms that the offshoots of those mechanisms. So number one, how does inflammation work? What is it? The impacts that it's having downstream, and actually how can we address reducing inflammation? Well, smart intermittent fasting is one of the ways that we can directly reduce inflammation. A study published in the journal Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism showed that a daily 12-hour intermittent fast was enough to significantly reduce levels of homocysteine and C-reactive protein, which are both major markers of heart disease and systemic inflammation. And in addition, researchers at the Department of Immunology and Microbial Science at the Scripps Research Institute found that intermittent fasting has a profound effect on autophagy throughout our entire body. Also, of course, including our brain. This cellular cleansing is triggered by intermittent fasting, and it's accelerating the removal of metabolic waste products, enabling our cells, tissues, and organs to work more efficiently. And also, smart intermittent fasting has been found to consistently boost the production of human growth hormone. All right, so again, the release of human growth hormone is on that circadian timing system. So having that window of smart intermittent fasting increases the production and release of HGH, or human growth hormone. Intermittent fasting can increase blood levels of human growth hormone by as much as 5-fold. And this is according to scientists at the University of Virginia Medical School. All right, so much powerful information to behold here, and the benefits that we see just by getting in alignment with circadian nutrition, circadian fasting, and allowing our bodies to engage in autophagy and cleaning out metabolic waste and just making room for new growth and development. All right, so this is what our genes expect from us. And this is the power of taking advantage of circadian nutrition. Now, circling back to our overarching topic of circadian nutrition, this study is amazing. Listen to this. This study was published in Frontiers in Nutrition. They found that when there is a misalignment between the endogenous rhythms in physiology and environmental inputs, such as feeding during the inactive phase, the body's ability to maintain homeostasis is impaired. The loss of phase coordination between us as humans and the environment, as well as internal misalignment between our tissues, can produce cardiometabolic diseases as a consequence. The timing of food intake is highlighted as a powerful environmental cue with the potential to destroy or restore the synchrony of circadian rhythms and metabolism. Those are strong words. Destroy or restore, right? It's like Megatron saying one, destroy Prime. And then Optimus Prime is like, restore Autobots, roll out, right? So these are very strong words, destroy or restore, based on when we're eating, and creating the increased risk of cardiometabolic breakdown by eating at abnormal times. And in an eye-opening 10-day ward study conducted by researchers at Harvard University, altering the fasting/eating cycles and sleep/wake cycles of 10 healthy study participants. This was 5 women and 5 men, to mimic typical shift work, to see how throwing off their eating and sleeping patterns, what direct impact does it have in just 10 days? They received very strict isocaloric meals to maintain consistency, all right? But over the course of the short study period, the circadian misalignment of when subjects ate and slept systematically decreased leptin, increased their blood glucose levels, increased insulin levels, disrupted their daily cortisol rhythm, increased their blood pressure, and reduced sleep efficiency. That's not good. That's a lot of problems. That's a lot of drama happening to our biology when we're throwing off our eating cycles and our sleeping cycles. Again, this happened in just a matter of days. All of these detrimental effects. The scientists also noted that the circadian misalignment induced a pre-diabetic state in several of the study participants, which these were healthy men and women to start. All right, so that quickly can put them into a pre-diabetic state. All right, so the science around circadian nutrition is just going to continue to grow. And this is one of the most important things for us to really start to think about, to process, and to evoke in our own lives. And one final component that I want to share with you is the timing specifically of certain foods, certain macronutrient ratios. What kind of impact does that have on our bodies? Because now we've got some really sound data on this. And so this is something highlighted in Eat Smarter as well. And it was a study conducted by researchers at St. Louis University in my hometown and published in the International Journal of Obesity. And it sought to discover what happens with fat loss when you eat a high carbohydrate breakfast versus a high protein/fat breakfast, when the calorie count of the meals is exactly the same. The researchers did have the study participants decrease their overall caloric intake by 1,000 calories a day in this study, but had different people use different macronutrient ratios just for their first meal of the day. And here's what they found after the 8-week study period. The study participants in the lower carb breakfast group showed a 61% greater reduction in body mass index, a 65% greater weight loss, a 34% greater reduction in waist circumference, and a 16% greater reduction in body fat percentage. All this based on the macronutrient ratio, the dominant macronutrient that they had in their first meal of the day. This study demonstrates another important point and a huge key to circadian nutrition, that the timing of your carbohydrate consumption matters. If the goal is fat loss, then loading up on carbs to start the day is probably not a good idea. The data shows that a higher ratio of carbs at your first meal tends to lead to storing more fat and having a bigger appetite. A study published in the peer-reviewed journal Appetite, appropriately, found that study participants eating a higher carb breakfast ended up being hungry again sooner after their meal than test subjects eating a lower carb breakfast. All right, now we've got to keep in context that the type of carbohydrate is not being addressed here necessarily, because our diets have shifted so heavily towards these heavily refined processed carbohydrate foods to start the day versus real whole food versions of carbohydrates and the proteins and fats. Because in that study that I mentioned, that 8-week study, the carbohydrate that they used was a bagel. All right. And the protein/fat food was eggs, right? So one is pretty heavily refined and processed. One is an egg, whole eggs. And the carbohydrates are not necessarily the issue. It's the type of the carbohydrates. So these aren't like low glycemic fruits and non-starchy vegetables, because the inclusion of those for a first meal of the day actually has a myriad of different health benefits, with increasing satiety hormones, increasing even things like cognitive performance. So we don't want to just black and white be like carbs are bad to have first thing in the morning. It's not that. It's what is the type? And by the way, a little fun fact, the word bagel is derived from a word meaning bracelet, all right? And ring as well. So clearly, but just imagine if somebody got that as a gift, like put this bagel on your wrist, girl. But anyways, if you've ever wondered why bagels have a hole in it, it's because of apparently when they were invented a couple hundred years ago, it enabled them to be cooked faster. And also they can use something like a dowel, and you can stack a bunch of them up for easy, storage, being able to have a lot in one place, right? So they're just slanging out bagel bracelets back in the day. So that's why they have a hole in them. Just weird stuff, I know. Anyways, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about our final component here, because it's just like, well, then when can I have more of the tasty types of carbohydrates rather than just kicking the day off with dessert? Because that's really what it is in our culture. We're having cake for breakfast. Many of us, like literally tens of millions of adults here in the United States, have cake for breakfast. And it sounds weird. It's like, no, but who does that? What is a muffin? It's a little cake. It's a little cake without the frosting. All right. What is pancakes? Cake is literally in the name. All right. Let's not lie to ourselves. Not to say I'm a fan of pancakes. That's when we can actually take something and upgrade it, and creating protein pancakes, for example, so it's not just, again, this black or white phenomenon, but maybe partitioning our carbohydrate to another time of day based on circadian nutrition, we could see some benefit. And in fact, a study published in the peer-reviewed journal Obesity took overweight test subjects and put them on either a general reduced calorie diet or a reduced calorie diet where the majority of their carbohydrates, about 80% of their carbs, were eaten at dinner. At the end of the 6-month study, the study participants who ate most of their carbs at dinner lost more weight, had greater reductions in waist circumference, and had an overall greater reduction of body fat mass compared to the conventional calorie-restricted dieters. Plus, the night carbers also had greater improvements in their fasting blood sugar, better insulin sensitivity, improved cholesterol ratios, reduced inflammation measured by C-reactive protein, and improved levels of leptin and adiponectin. This is profound. It's absolutely profound, and it's kind of counter to a lot of things that we're taught, that, you want to bring in your carbs to start the day, quote, carb load, because you're going to burn off that fuel. And that's looking at the interaction with calories and metabolism through tunnel vision, right? Whereas if we're going through the day and we're not leaning heavily on carbohydrates and or even eating that early in the first place, we can kind of, if we're using an analogy of a car, we can utilize the fuel we already have in the car and then top it off at the end of the day, right? Replenishing the liver glycogen and muscle glycogen by adding in our carbs at that later portion of the day. Now, just to be clear, this is going to still be based on our own unique metabolic fingerprint. None of these things are black and white. This does not mean that you having carbs, your heaviest dose of carbs in the evening is going to be best for you. It's all going to be based on you as a unique individual. And that's what Eat Smarter is really about, is educating ourselves on that and all these different components, and having the tools for us to experiment and to have some joy and some more flexibility, and not getting so caught up in the dogma around nutrition, but also honoring what are the things that our genes expect of us. What are the things that humans have been doing the longest that have gotten us to the place we are today, prior to the decline, the rapid decline in our health in recent decades, which again, has just really thrown a major spiked monkey wrench into our metabolism with our abnormal sleep cycles and abnormal eating patterns. All right, so having these things as tools, but this doesn't mean we can't have a late night snack. This doesn't mean that we can't have breakfast. It's just being empowered to, let's tinker with some of these tools, some of these insights, and find out how it works for us. Because from what the data shows, what I bring forward here in the Model Health Show, what does the majority of evidence show? Because there's always going to be something counter. That's just the nature of reality, because we're so unique. But what does the majority of evidence show that's going to help the majority of people? And in summary here, scientists at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies gave 3 recommendations regarding circadian nutrition based on their years of assessment and study of our biological clock genes. Number 1, they recommend avoid eating for at least 1 hour after waking up. All right, this is a great time to get up, get hydrated. You can have some tea, have some pu'er, for example, some green tea. This is a good time to do some journaling, maybe a little bit of fasted exercise, maybe a little bit of meditation. For that first hour of the day, they recommend not eating. Number 2, they recommend that we not eat at least about 2 hours before our bedtime. That seems pretty reasonable, and they recommend between 2 and 3 hours. And I don't think that's a big stretch from where many of us are today. Number 3, they recommend that when traveling, especially by plane, to actually fast a little bit more on those days. All right, to give our metabolism, our microbiome, and our cells to really kind of recalibrate and get adjusted. Sex appears to be protective of the number one killer in our society. Heart disease ends approximately 630,000 lives every year. This past year, nearly 700,000 people died from heart disease. Now, part of longevity is not dying. And so addressing this number one killer in our culture is of the utmost importance. And sex appears to have a hand in this. A 16-year study published in the American Journal of Cardiology, conducted with over 1,000 male participants aged 40 to 70, found that men who had sex at least twice a week were almost 50% less likely to die from heart disease than men who had sex once a month or less. Now, there's many factors that go into this when looking at the connection between sex and cardiovascular health. But, it's so interesting that connection, love, even sex is related to the heart. And to stretch this out even further and looking not just at cardiovascular health, but overall immune system function and immune system performance, there's an interesting connection between sex and immune health as well. A study presented at the Eastern Psychological Association Convention in 1999 found that study participants who had sex once or twice a week had higher levels of the antibody immunoglobulin A, or IgA, compared with participants who got busy less often. Now, IgA is found in saliva and the mucosal linings, and it's one of the very first defenses that our bodies have when protecting ourselves from infections. It's one of the very first frontline immunological weapons that we have is IgA, and this is enhanced through sex. And according to the researchers at Wilkes University in Pennsylvania, sex once or twice a week in the winter can boost the immune system and reduce the chances of catching colds and viral infections. So snuggling up in the winter can actually enhance the immune system. So again, we're looking at the defensive capacity that sex seems to have in protecting us against cardiovascular disease and also infectious diseases as well. And now it's also well established that healthy sexual activity can keep our brains younger, because we're not just interested in increasing our lifespan, we also want to increase our health span and our cognitive ability, our cognitive performance throughout our lives so that we can enjoy all of the years of our lives and have more life within those years. A study conducted by a team of researchers at the University of Maryland found that regular sexual activity not only triggers neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons in the brain, the creation of new brain cells, but sex also improves cognitive function, potentially helping people to think more clearly. All right. Now, I don't know if this has happened to you before. Have you ever thought more clearly after sex happens? Maybe you realize it was a mistake, depending on the construct of the sex. All right. Or maybe you realize oh, wow, life isn't so bad, or whatever the case might be. Maybe you gain a level of clarity after the session is over. Now, this is what the researchers found. Now, another study, and this one was published in 2010 in the Journal of the Public Library of Science, found that sexual activity causes cell growth directly in the hippocampus. So this is well established to be the memory center of the brain. So this is the part of our brain that's associated with long-term memory. And sex has been found to actually create more neurogenesis, more cell growth and development in the hippocampus. Really, really powerful. Now, this leads to a significant assessment, which is understanding the most important sexual organ that we have is actually not what's downstairs, but what's between our ears. All right? Our brain is our most powerful and important sexual organ because your brain largely controls your sexual health. But as the data shows, your sexual health also influences your brain. Now, taking advantage of the things that you're going to be learning about today, in particular in the context of sex and improving longevity through sex, This requires some intentionality. This can't be something like, hey, honey, I want to increase my longevity. You know what to do, like that's not the approach for this. So a healthy sexual relationship tends to have tenets of communication, trust, and safety. And the ingredients for more love and connection are going to be varied from relationship to relationship. And this isn't the context for this particular episode today because we're dedicated to longevity, but we have several masterclass episodes looking at improving the context and content of our relationships. And so we'll have several of those for you in the show notes. We've got episodes with John Gray, who wrote the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. We've got episodes with relationship experts like Christine Hassler. The list goes on and on. So definitely check out the show notes if you want more on that domain. But I want to look at another way that sex has an impact on our lifespan, which is the impact that sex has on happiness. And the majority of clinical evidence shows that happy people do live longer. There is some data showing that pessimistic people can outlive people who are not as pessimistic, but the majority of data shows in a massive way that happy people do indeed live longer. In an Arizona State University study on about 60 middle-aged women, physical affection or sexual behavior with a partner significantly predicted lower negative mood and stress and higher positive mood the following day. Simply put, the researchers found that sex and physical intimacy led women to feel less stressed and be in a better mood the following day. And we know that stress is a major killer. Stress is a major health issue in our culture today. Upwards of 80% of physician visits today are for stress-related illnesses. When there was a time when this was more for injuries and infectious diseases, like that was the thing that was just the norm. We've largely dealt with a lot of these issues, and now we're moving towards these chronic issues that, again, even though infectious diseases might kind of come and go, these chronic health issues, these chronic lifestyle-driven diseases just continue to go up each and every decade in our culture, and they're not really stopping. And so addressing this at its core is going to be important. So anything that can help to reduce stress and connection, affection, and sex are some of those components. A part of that being, even if we look through, because in that study, we're talking about intimacy and connection even, not necessarily just the dynamic of sex, helping with positive mood, but specifically looking at sex, if we look in the construct of orgasm, you're releasing a cocktail of chemicals that have some really remarkable anti-anxiety effects, antidepressive effects. And we're talking about a cocktail of like oxytocin, prolactin, of the increasing serotonin. All of these things happen in that context of an orgasm. So, and I was kind of hesitant to say cocktail when I was saying this chemical cocktail. That's what caught me up. So, in addition to that, a 2004 study of 16,000 Americans published in the National Bureau of Economic Research found that people who are happy tend to be the ones getting the most action. The study estimated that boosting between the sheets time from once a month to once a week was the happiness equivalent of getting a $50,000 raise. The researchers did note that the type of sex mattered, with sex in a loving relationship showing the most benefit. So again, it's like having that dynamic psychologically giving the same happiness equivalent as getting more money. All right. So a lot of really interesting data on this context and the relationship between healthy sexual activity, healthy sexual relationship, and longevity. And we're going to actually build on this piece because sex is one component of something we're going to come back to and talk about more in a moment. But I just wanted to start with this because this isn't usually a part of the conversation when we're talking about longevity. When we're talking about not just increased lifespan, but increased health span. And sex appears to have some really interesting protective effects against our biggest killer, and also adding to the equation of healthy biochemistry, of healthy immune system function, and so much more. So that's number one on our list of these 7 surprising things that are clinically proven to extend our lifespan and our health span. The next one that we're going to talk about is one of the most powerful aspects of nutrition that is largely negated, is largely looked past. And this specifically influences one of the biggest aspects of longevity, which is cognitive health and the health of our brains. Most people are finally aware that the human brain is upwards of 80% water. So somewhere in the ballpark of 75 to 80% water. It's the most water dominant organ in our bodies next to our lungs. All right, so hydration of our brain is critically important. All right, now, what most people are not aware of is that water alone cannot maintain the functionality and connectivity of the brain cells. Without this key category of nutrients, water can't even properly hydrate, travel throughout, or store itself adequately in the brain or our other tissues, for that matter. And this category that I'm referring to is electrolytes. Electrolytes are minerals that carry an electrical charge. And it's really amazing for us to understand that our body is really running on this electrical energy in many ways. And we use devices that can measure this electrical output of the body. If we look at being able to monitor the activity of the heart, we see on the movies, boop, boop, we're measuring the electrical output of the human heart. But all of our cells are doing this, interacting with and expressing this electrical energy. And without electrolytes, literally, it's required for signal transduction for our brain cells to communicate with each other. When we become deficient in electrolytes, all of these processes for our brain and body start to plummet. Researchers at McGill University found that sodium, one of our key electrolytes, literally functions as a, quote, on-off switch in the brain for specific neurotransmitters that support optimal function and literally protect the brain against neurodegenerative diseases. So it functions as an on-off switch. So when we're low in sodium, it can switch off these protective neurotransmitters and the activity of these neurotransmitters if we don't have optimal amounts of sodium. It is that important. But yet, most often when we think of sodium, we probably think about it in a negative light, in a negative context. We'll talk more about that, but I want you to understand how important these electrolytes are. And sodium is just one of them. So it literally helps to function and defend the brain against things like epilepsy and neuropathic pain. Now, we cannot have a conversation about electrolytes and the impact on the brain without talking about magnesium. A fascinating new study published in the journal Neuron found that magnesium is able to restore critical brain plasticity and improve cognitive function, to restore it. So this is the thing that's lost. It gets degraded over our lifespan. Magnesium is key here in restoring brain plasticity and more. So let's look at this in the context of another one of our big killers, because again, a part of longevity is not dying. A double-blind, placebo-controlled study, and this was published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, found that simply improving magnesium levels in adult test subjects, and these were folks between the ages of 50 and 70, could potentially reverse brain aging by over 9 years. Again, if we're talking about lifespan and health span, literally being able to make our brains younger. Something so simple. It's a simple nutrient, but it's also one of our biggest nutrient deficiencies in our culture. Right now, 56%, at least at minimum, probably closer to 70% of US citizens are chronically deficient in magnesium. And this is literally required for our brain to run processes. So we're literally walking around in our society with a brain that is underperforming, that's not functioning at its optimal level, being deficient in these key electrolytes. And with magnesium being such a big nutrient deficiency, the question is why? We probably get some in different foods and supplementation and things like that, but it's because magnesium is required by so many processes in the body. It's responsible for over 650 biochemical processes in the body. Again, that we're aware of. It's probably much more, but this is just what we've confirmed today. All right, so being deficient in magnesium, what that means is that's 650 things your body can't do or can't do adequately because of this one key electrolyte deficiency. All right, magnesium is that important. Now, magnesium is also required to make the very thing that sustains our energy, that gives us energy, this energy currency of our cells, known as ATP. Magnesium is literally required to make ATP. We often attribute this performance or the creation of ATP to our mitochondria, right? These energy power plants, these energy powerhouses within our cells. And we can have hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria in an individual cell. It's truly remarkable. Now, here's the key. The mitochondria cannot do their job without electrolytes being present, magnesium being one, and sodium and potassium being another, functioning as what's known as this sodium-potassium pump, enabling the communication or the transition of nutrients and functionality at multiple places throughout our tissue matrix. All right, we need sodium, potassium, magnesium there in order for the magic to happen. So we just talk about the end product or the end product station with the mitochondria and ATP. If we don't have electrolytes, our bodies can't do the amazing things that they're designed to do. So in this context of ATP, magnesium is used as an enzyme cofactor that enables our mitochondria to make copies of itself. If your magnesium levels are low, then you're automatically going to have a difficult time making new mitochondria, and your health will suffer as a result. Having healthy, robust mitochondria as we age, defending us against accelerated aging diseases, accelerated aging environmental inputs, things that speed up the aging of our cells, that can burn away our telomeres. Right? So our telomeres are one of the best biological indicators that we have today as to how long we're going to live. Now, the science is still pretty fresh here. I've been talking about the science around telomeres for over a decade now and having wonderful conversations with people who've been pioneering in the discovery of things like telomerase, which is an enzyme that can effectively add length back onto those telomeres, right? So as these end caps on our chromosomes, these telomeres, think about them like the end caps on your shoestrings, all right, AKA these aglets. As our cells replicate, a little bit of that telomere gets clipped off until the cell reaches its endpoint, its senescence, its programmed cell death. And we want we want a healthy cellular replication. We don't want things to be going haywire, because that's where we get into conversations about cancer, where the cell doesn't have that programmed cell death. What we do want to do is, if we can, slow that process down a bit so that the cells can have a longer lifespan, a healthier lifespan, and have a nice synchronization with these cells being healthier longer and the replacement by new cells. And paying attention to things that help to fortify and support, protect our telomeres from getting burned down too quickly. Well, we know, for example, stress burns away those telomeres faster. Smoking burns away those telomeres faster. Sleep deprivation burns away those telomeres faster. Nutrient deprivation. All right, so missing out on key nutrients can also expedite the burning away of those telomeres, because it's a stress response in the body when we don't have these key nutrients. Now, why do electrolytes matter so much in the context of longevity? Well, another piece is the homeostatic changes that take place in advanced age that can deteriorate key signaling for electrolytes. And this data was published in the journal JAMA Surgery. So that's the Journal of the American Medical Association Surgery. And what's so interesting to take away from this data is that as we age, the signaling, our body's cries or calling out for our electrolytes, can get a little bit deranged. So we need to be even more proactive in making sure we're getting these key nutrients in. So proactively ensuring that we're getting adequate amounts of sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, etc. Very, very important. Now, what about specific data looking at electrolytes and longevity? Now, this one is pretty shocking, and this involves sodium. A peer-reviewed study published in the European Heart Journal titled Sodium Intake, Life Expectancy, and All-Cause Mortality revealed, quote, observation of sodium intake correlating positively with life expectancy and inversely with all-cause mortality, unquote. Shocking to the researchers and the scientific community at large, higher sodium intake than conventional beliefs about sodium is associated with a longer average life expectancy and reduced all-cause mortality, a reduced risk of death from all causes, according to this meta-analysis of data from 181 countries. Now, again, this is very outside of the paradigm of what we believe about sodium. And there are other confounding factors that could be attributing to the longer lifespan seen in the study. But the researchers did do a good job of accounting for a variety of different things, and sodium surprisingly stood out. And the lead researcher in the study said that, just getting this paper published was so hard. It was one of the most rejected papers, and he's got a ton of peer-reviewed studies that he's published. He wasn't going after to prove this. It's surprising to find out that sodium has this correlation with lifespan, with longevity. Again, causation is not confirmed, but it stood out in the data. Now, the question should automatically be why. Not just looking at what we believe to be the negative aspect of sodium. We've already covered some of it, because neglecting the fact that sodium is literally required to help conduct the impulses of your brain cells and your entire nervous system. It's required for healthy nervous system function. Kind of important. It's also required for muscle contractions. It's also required to help maintain proper fluid balance in all of our tissues. So this isn't something to just brush off like, nah, sodium's not that important. And also, we can't have more sodium than what we're programmed to believe is where we should be at. But it's understanding, again, sodium is required for so many processes, and we can actually pretty easily become deficient in these nutrients, especially if we're taking on a healthier lifestyle, because the majority of sodium people are taking in is from processed foods. About 70%, and this is depending on which resource you're looking at, 70 to upwards of 80% of the sodium people are taking in the average American diet is through processed food consumption. So just by kind of cleaning up our nutrition and avoiding these heavily processed foods, which are also coming along with a tremendous amount of sugar and chemicals, pesticides and fungicides, artificial this and that, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavorings, preservatives, the list goes on and on, that are damaging to our cells. But it's the sodium that gets most vilified. And most notably because in our popular conversation around sodium, we connect those two together, sodium and salt. We use them interchangeably, but they're two different things. All right. Sodium is a part of what makes conventional salt, which is about 60% chloride and 40% sodium. So that's the, quote, table salt. So these things are used interchangeably. And in our culture, in health conversations, sodium is often attributed to blood pressure. That's what we think about. Forget all the other things sodium is responsible for and the critical need for sodium. It's most associated cognitively for us in our culture to be a villain surrounding blood pressure. Now, sodium is required to help to modulate and manage our blood pressure, absolutely. But in simple terms, blood pressure is, if you're just wondering what is blood pressure, it's the force that blood is placing upon the walls of our blood vessels as it circulates throughout our bodies. And high blood pressure is when that force is elevated to the point that it can increase the risk of damage to our blood vessels and the cardiovascular system overall, including our heart. So this is kind of important. And the loudest screams about sodium is that it increases our blood pressure, which is true to a degree. To a degree. There's very little nuance here because it's just like sodium, watch it or you're going to die. But here's the reality. The research that initially vilified salt many decades ago originated from animal studies that gave rats massive amounts of salt, about 50 times the average intake, and deduced from that salt is a major concern for high blood pressure. That's where it all started. It all started. Yet, a large-scale, multinational study that was recently published found that salt intake does not increase health risk, even at levels that were once deemed to be unhealthy. So what gives? How is this possible? The researchers concluded that elevated blood pressure is a symptom and not a cause of cardiovascular disease and morbidity. It's a symptom of cardiovascular disease, not a cause of cardiovascular disease. And dietary salt is on a much lower rung of things that contribute to the problem, with much bigger issues being elevated triglycerides. Again, something that happens through the consumption of sugar-laden processed foods, elevated stress hormones, and inflammation. All of these things relate directly to abnormal diet and abnormal living conditions that we're now all exposed to today in our modern society. Our DNA is getting environmental inputs that we just simply didn't evolve with throughout the entire evolution of humanity. If we're talking like 99.99999% of the time that humans have been here, we have not eaten foods that we eat today. We've not been exposed to this kind of abnormal low-grade stress chronically happening, and the immense amount of environmental toxicity that we're exposed to today. All of these are new things that are constantly putting a pressure on our systems. This is why we have to be even more adamant about building our health and making sure that we're more resilient and adaptable. All right. Now, again, looking at sodium here and not being a major contributor to cardiovascular disease, let's dive a little bit deeper, because the study also found that even up to around 2 teaspoons of salt per day is not problematic for most people, noting that there are indeed genetic predispositions for some folks who have challenges managing salt. All right, so 2 teaspoons might seem like a lot. That's quite a bit of salt. That's a saltiness. That's getting a little salty. But this is because of going off the RDA, right? The recommended daily allowance, which is generally to prevent deficiency and disease. All right, it's not what's optimum. All right, that's the thing. But what's even more eye-opening is that salt intake closer to the RDA and below the RDA of about 1 teaspoon per day was found to actually increase the risk of heart disease and high blood pressure. Sodium too low increased high blood pressure. A meta-analysis published in the Cochrane Database of Systematic Reviews uncovered that study participants placed on a low sodium diet did have slightly lower blood pressure in the short term, but found that the restricted sodium also led to elevated triglycerides, elevated stress hormones, and accordingly, elevated blood pressure. Very different story from what we hear around sodium. Now, also a study conducted by researchers at Harvard Medical School and published in the journal Metabolism found that low salt intake directly increases insulin resistance in healthy test subjects. Insulin resistance is one of the key components that accelerates aging, that creates advanced degradation of tissues. And having not enough sodium in the diet, again, we're using these interchangeably here, but they should kind of be pulled apart, salt and sodium. Sodium is critical in helping to modulate and manage our hormone function, including the functionality of insulin. We're going to kick things off with some new data that was highlighted by researchers at the Cleveland Clinic. They used artificial intelligence to search for hidden clues in the structure of SARS-CoV-2 to predict how it invades human cells and what might stop it. And one observation stood out for the researchers. The virus could potentially be blocked by melatonin. That's right, this glorified sleep-related hormone has some really remarkable effects in modulating and supporting the body in defense of COVID-19. So our number one strategy here is about sleep and the regulatory forces with sleep, including melatonin. The scientists noted that it essentially acts as a moderator. Melatonin acts as a moderator to help keep our self-protective responses from going haywire, which this appears to be one of the primary issues taking an asymptomatic or a mild case of COVID-19 into something severe, is our own body's response in an overactive immune response. So melatonin appears to be a moderator, helping the body to mount an appropriate response when interacting with this virus. In the recently published results, melatonin continued to stand out, and people taking it had significantly lower odds of developing COVID-19. And the data indicated that even if you contracted COVID, you had a much lower risk of dying from it. You had a much lower risk of severe symptoms when folks were utilizing melatonin. Other researchers noticed similar patterns. A study conducted by researchers at Columbia University found that intubated patients had better rates of survival if they received melatonin. This is not something you'll see on the news headlines right now, that something so inexpensive could have such a profound effect. And the lead researcher in the study believes that the real issue at play may not be melatonin at all, but the function it famously controls: sleep. Additional research published by the Mayo Clinic shows that people who don't get quality sleep, efficient, effective sleep, or don't get enough sleep are far more likely to get sick after being exposed to a virus. This is one of the foundational tenets about human function. Our sleep quality is something that we've not evolved out of because there's so many critical processes that take place during sleep that simply cannot be replaced. A few of these contributing factors to this is that during our sleep, our immune system actually releases these proteins called cytokines. All right. Now listen to this, because we have this cognitive bias towards cytokines right now. So we're going to open this up a little bit more. Cytokines, some of which actually helped to promote efficient sleep cycles and improve our overall sleep quality. We're not hearing cytokines can do that. But this is also because certain cytokines need to increase when we have an infection or inflammation to help modulate the process, or when we're under stress, this process takes place as well. And sleep deprivation has been found to directly decrease production of these protective cytokines. All right. Now, on the other side, you've probably heard a lot of the news about these cytokine storms being one of the major side effects associated with COVID-19, an overreaction by our immune system. Well, again, it's important to note that there are an array of different types of cytokines, and they all have different roles. From interferons to interleukins to chemokines, there's so many different types of these remarkable compounds. And by the way, again, these cytokines are proteins. That's at their basic place, they're proteins. And so what are proteins made from? In our bodies, where do we get proteins? All right, where it doesn't just happen. Where are we getting the building blocks to make these proteins? It's from our food. So we also want to keep that in the back of our mind today as well, that our food is literally creating our immune system. The food that we eat creates our immune cells. Now, again, some cytokines actually help to regulate our sleep quality, defend the body from cancer, and actually keep inflammation in check, while other cytokines are pro-inflammatory in their role. Right? Inflammation has a role as well. It's not that it's all bad, because that inflammatory process is really calling on more immune system weapons to respond and get to this location of need. It's kind of like a signal that's getting set off in the body, but that signal can go too far. And these pro-inflammatory cytokines, or this cytokine storm, listen to this. A study published in PLOS One, the Public Library of Science 1, found that sleep deprivation triggers the excessive levels of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So now you can start to see how our sleep quality, or lack thereof, can actually suppress the modulation, the production, and the activity of cytokines that actually help to regulate and improve our sleep. It can suppress that when we're sleep deprived. And when we're sleep deprived, we're increasing the productivity, the activity, the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, stacking the cards against us. This is a primary tenet of human health, and the function of our immune system is dependent upon our sleep quality. Yet, this is getting no attention at all in major media and also from our public health officials. So again, we should be questioning, why is that? Primary thing. And we're going to circle back to one of the other major points that they are talking about, but they're leaving the sleep equation out of that conversation as well. But I also wanted to note that researchers in the aforementioned study stated that sleep restriction can lead to persistent changes in the immune system by promoting inflammation and increasing susceptibility to illness. That's their conclusion. Now, sleep deprivation dramatically disturbs the systems that actually help to regulate our immune system, so the overarching systems, including the brain and nervous system. One of the primary roles of sleep that we now understand today, only in the last few years have we actually uncovered this, is the importance of sleep in regulating detoxification. And one of those being detoxification specifically in the brain for our glymphatic system run by the glial cells in the brain. This system essentially is cleaning house from the trillions of processes that take place in a given day, and the metabolic waste products. Those things need to get swept out of the brain, essentially. And so the glymphatic system kicks into action. When we're sleeping, it's 10 times more active than when we're awake to remove these debris from our system that can create a lot of stagnation and depress our cognitive function, the function of our brain overall, and our nervous system that, again, is in constant contact with our immune system. Everything is happening in the same medium. So when we're sleep deprived, inherently, our brain function is dramatically diminishing, and by its very nature, dramatically diminishing the function of our immune system. That's just another one of the layers and connections. But let's look at another connection between sleep deprivation and COVID-19. A recent study published in the British Journal of Medicine looked at the data from 6 different countries and uncovered that longer sleep duration, getting more sleep, is associated with lower odds of contracting COVID-19. What the researchers uncovered was that for every hour increase in the amount of time spent asleep, it was associated with a 12% lower odds of becoming infected with COVID-19. So if someone is regularly getting 5 hours of sleep, which is not uncommon in our world today by any stretch of the imagination. Here in the United States, we've got about 115 million of our citizens are regularly sleep deprived. So again, this isn't an abnormal issue. So if someone, for example, is getting 5 hours a night and they were to devote more to their health, devote more to their sleep, and they bump this up by 2 hours a night, according to the researchers' data, this would decrease their risk of infection by 24%. Just getting a little bit more sleep. If they were going all-star and trying to get 8 hours of sleep, that would reduce their risk of infection by 36%, according to their data. Now, keep in mind, this was an observational study, and unfortunately, this is some of the best data that we have on the subject. But the good news is that scientists are asking the questions. They're researching these things. They're running clinical trials. They're analyzing data to see, hey, the things that our genes expect us to do to be healthy, to have a healthy functioning immune system, what if we do them? What if we go ahead and make sure that people are getting adequate sleep? See what happens. Let's track when people are sleep deprived, see what happens, and share the data with, unfortunately, the scientific community is who's usually looking at this data. It's not getting into the hands of the public who need it most. And this is why the Model Health Show is that bridge. This is why we operate as that bridge, to make sure that we take this peer-reviewed evidence and all of the academic jargon that they use to make things unnecessarily complex. How do we make this make sense and actionable for people today? And I love the statement from Albert Einstein that says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And so that's what we strive to do, is to take these complex things and to make them to make sense for everyday folks. Because this stuff doesn't have to be complex. Adding a lot of complexity creates more confusion. Adding a lot of complexity disempowers you. Adding a lot of complexity puts people in a position where they start to outsource their thinking to someone else. So with that said, I'm going to look at one more piece that came from this particular study, again, published in the BMJ. The researchers found that participants with documented sleep problems had an 88% greater odds of contracting a COVID-19 infection. Wow, almost 100%. All right, 88% greater odds. Sleep matters. It matters. It's always mattered, but right now it matters more than ever for us to just put some attention into it, because the regulatory force of our sleep far outweighs any other intervention that is being tossed around today. This is something our genes expect of us. Our bodies aren't necessarily telling us today that we're deficient in a new drug, but our bodies can tell us very quickly that we're deficient in sleep. So as you've seen, sleep itself is a critical regulator of immune function, but melatonin itself plays a major part in calibrating the immune system. A new observational study, this was published in PLOS One Biology, tracked the data of almost 27,000 people and found that melatonin usage is associated with a 28% reduced likelihood of a SARS-CoV-2 infection. Melatonin was an effective prophylactic, so protecting people for diabetics and other subgroups as well. But one that jumped out in this study was melatonin use in African Americans was associated with a 52% reduced likelihood of a positive laboratory test for SARS-CoV-2. And this was after adjusting for other factors like age, sex, smoking history, and various disease comorbidities. Melatonin jumped out. Now, this isn't about running out to go and gobble up all the melatonin out there. We want to look at first, how can we put ourselves in position for our bodies to do the thing that it's designed to do, which is to produce melatonin in copious amounts to help to regulate our immune system, our sleep, the list goes on and on. Melatonin also has well-established anti-cancer functionality as well. So it's not just a force that regulates our sleep. That's kind of putting it in a box, a very small box, when melatonin is a master regulator of our circadian system, our biological clocks, our clock genes that we have that have now been established. Melatonin is a regulator of our hormones, our endocrine system overall, our nervous system. Very powerful. So just to haphazardly start taking melatonin, maybe not the best idea for a lot of folks, but using it in an intentional way can be helpful. But number one, first and foremost, let's make sure that we're producing adequate melatonin in of itself. One of the primary ways that we're suppressing melatonin production is by being exposed to abnormal light. All right. Harvard researchers have uncovered what, again, this is passed around a lot today. A lot of people, quote, know these things, but are you doing it? Are you paying attention to this? They established that the light coming from our devices, our televisions, our laptops, our smartphones, do in fact suppress melatonin in the evening and increase cortisol in the evening. Essentially, the researchers found that approximately every hour you're on your device, you're suppressing melatonin for about 30 minutes. Right, so every hour we're on our device in the evening, suppressing melatonin for 30 minutes. So could this be one of the primary reasons behind our epidemics of sleep deprivation and abnormal sleep issues? It's definitely a big role player because, again, in our evolution, this is a very new thing. It's not to say we can't watch a movie or do some work or be on our phone, but we've got to understand what are the side effects. This is new. Our biology has never been exposed to these things until recent years. And we don't know the full ramifications. So it'd probably be a good idea to err on the side of a little bit of caution. You know, having a little bit of a screen curfew in the evening if melatonin is important to you, producing optimal melatonin, which is a master regulator of our health. Maybe give yourself 30 minutes. Just start with 30. All right. I'm not saying for you to, get off your devices 2 hours before bed and sit there and twiddle your thumbs, because for certain, if you go from being on your phone, like the last thing you do before bed is like look at your phone and like, give a little kiss goodnight, and lay it down next to you, which is crazy in of itself, the amount of people who actually sleep with their phone. I know it's not you. Well, I know it's a couple of people. It's, according to the data, we're talking in the ballpark of maybe 40% of some populations, even upwards to like 80%. If we're talking about like teens. And so people are growing up with these habits and not understanding what it's doing to their health. So Instead of doing that, and you suddenly try to be off your device for 2 hours in the evening, you're probably going to have really strong withdrawal. All right. And so just start with 30 minutes. There's 30-minute screen curfew. Allow your body to naturally produce, because how melatonin, what the requirement is to produce melatonin is darkness. As the sun is going down, if we were living in a natural environment, our melatonin would start going up. Cortisol is going down, melatonin's going up. But in our world today, we can manufacture a second daytime by keeping these artificial lights on, beaming in our eyes and on our skin. So, but I love our tech. Like, we couldn't do this without it. But we want to make sure that we are intentionally running these things and they're not running us. All right, so that's one, is having a screen curfew, really helpful for fortifying and supporting melatonin. Second tip is to make sure that we're getting some sun exposure during the daytime. That sun exposure actually helps to increase our body's production of serotonin, which serotonin is a precursor for melatonin. And also, sun exposure during the day has been found to dramatically decrease cortisol levels in the evening, which cortisol is really an antithesis of melatonin. If cortisol levels are kind of dominating, it's going to press melatonin down. And the opposite is true as well. So there's just a couple of real world, simple, free tips that we can utilize, and also using some protection on our screens. So getting yourself Flux on your desktop and laptops, that's f.lux, is a free app that kind of pulls off the most problematic color from your screen. You could set it at a certain time. You could set it to your time zone. I've been using it for, I don't know, probably at least 8 years, I believe, 7-8 years. But so we got Flux, and it's built into many other phones today. You know, if you got Night Shift, for example, and on Androids and other phones, you can download apps that do a similar thing as the iPhone. So this is getting more and more attention today, but the question is, are we doing it? So those are some simple adjuncts with melatonin. Just don't block your body's production of it. Number one, Captain Obvious, all right? But we also don't want to negate the fact that seeing the clinical role of melatonin in the research might be something for folks to think about, especially if they're trying to get on a healthy sleep regimen, if they're changing time zones, those type of things, or if they just need a little bit of assistance, if they're not in a great state of health, maybe adding a little bit of melatonin can be a great intervention. But we want to make sure that we're doing it in the most efficacious way possible. Ideally, we want to make sure that if we are using melatonin, that it doesn't have any binders, fillers, any of these nefarious ingredients that are in a lot of supplements. You want to make sure that you're getting your supplements from companies that do stuff the right way. They're going the extra mile to make sure that they're not delivering toxicity along with the good stuff that you're trying to get. And also with melatonin, it's a great idea to have something that's in liquid form. And the one that I use, and I travel with it, so I don't often use melatonin, but except if I'm like changing time zones, that kind of thing, it's actually been found to help to reset and recalibrate the circadian clock and helping people to get back kind of locked in their time zone quicker by having a little bit of melatonin. Now we're going to look at, again, this is one of the clinically proven ways to fortify your immune system in the age of COVID-19. This next part, and this is still with sleep because this is important, is looking at the mandated intervention right now and the role that sleep actually plays in its effectiveness if done, again, in an efficacious manner that was really about health. This would be paid attention to. A review of multiple studies published in the American Journal of Infection Control titled "Lack of Sleep Can Jeopardize Vaccine Effectiveness" highlights yet another component of real health that's ignored in our current culture. The study, along with several others, this isn't the only one, suggests that vaccine effectiveness against infectious diseases may be impaired significantly in sleep-deprived individuals. To take this a step further and look at some specific numbers, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF, found that sleep-deprived individuals who were sleeping less than 6 hours per night were over 11 times less likely to be protected by a vaccine than those who got adequate sleep. Not 2 times, not 5, 11 times less likely to be protected by this particular intervention. No study is perfect, of course, but these numbers should be at least a little bit unsettling and spark more advocacy around sleep wellness. But that's not the case right now. And that's why we have to make it the case, because it's hardly getting a word from health professionals, for people who are out here, recommending get your donut, get your injection. They're not talking about sleep. They're not talking about the fact that you can dramatically depress your response to this intervention if you're not sleeping well, and wonder why we're having the problems that we're having right now. Things aren't working out. But again, we got to keep in mind the media charades is making people point the finger at each other and not looking at the lack of integrity in the interventions themselves. So one of those interventions, critically important, our genes expect from us, every single cell in our body, our DNA expects to function normally. Every single one of our immune cells requires adequate sleep. So that's number one on our list. Now we're going to move on to number 2 on our list of 8 clinically proven ways to fortify our immune system in the age of COVID-19. And the next one is the connection between dehydration and COVID-19. A collaborative analysis conducted by researchers from Arizona State University, Harvard Medical School, and UCSF detailed how suboptimal hydration in the weeks before contracting COVID-19 is a significant risk factor for severe outcomes like death. That's severe. The review analyzed experimental, clinical, and epidemiological evidence that suggests that chronic suboptimal hydration in the weeks before infection might increase risk of COVID-19 mortality in multiple ways. They looked at the impact of dehydration on several mechanisms affected by COVID, like vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, aquaporins, these protein channels that enable movement of hydration in and out of the cells, and the sodium-potassium pump that literally helps to drive our overall cellular function. So they analyze all these things. Now, the next part of the analysis, and this is critically important to know, is how SARS-CoV-2 is able to enter into human cells in the first place. And this is through angiotensin converting enzyme 2, or the ACE2 receptor, which has been identified as the primary receptor that SARS-CoV-2 utilizes for viral entry. Now, the study states, quote, chronic suboptimal hydration in the weeks before exposure to COVID-19 may conceivably result in greater abundance of ACE2 receptors in the lungs, which increases likelihood of COVID-19 infection. With our lung epithelial cells being preset for exaggerated immune response, increased capacity for capillary leakage of fluid into the airway space, and or reduced capacity for both passive and active transport of fluid out of the airways, unquote. Now, the question should be, how on earth can dehydration lead to severe outcomes from viral infections like COVID-19? Well, it's important for us to really understand that every single one of our immune cells are functioning in a water medium. It's all based on water. Your immune cells themselves are made from the food that you eat and the water that you drink. It is the primary component that's making up the system itself. So this shouldn't even be a far stretch. The beauty of this is that researchers are asking these questions. Researchers are paying attention to these basic tenets about human health. One of them being, we require optimal hydration for optimal immune function. In the report, they also postulate how the cytokine storm is linked to dehydration as well. It seems like, from the media's perspective and from so-called health officials, that this cytokine storm is this haphazard thing. We don't understand anything about it. We don't know any foundational tenets. Cytokines are proteins. That's what they are. You know what proteins are made of? They're made from food. They're made from water. All right, that's the structure of them themselves. This is the basis of the very thing that we're looking at. If you don't understand that, how are you even going to understand the activity of it? So that's number one. Number two, these things are not happening without a causative agent. That immune response, that cytokine storm, it's an overreaction, well-noted, well-established overreaction by our immune system. But our immune system In a way, it's trying to protect us, but it's about promoting an adequate response and not going too far. And water plays a key role in that intelligence. That's the thing. Water has intelligence. It literally becomes life on earth. It literally becomes us. That's how powerful it is. And this is not being discussed. These basic tenets about health that actually keep us robust and healthy and resilient aren't being discussed. But we're going to continue to make sure that we're knocking down the door to ensure that these critical tenets of human health and immune function are not only understood, but become the norm. In the report, the researchers stated the hypothesized hydration effects suggest strategies for reducing COVID-19 risk, such as 1, public health recommendations to increase intake of drinking water. We can drink more water. When have you heard that one time on the news? One time by a public health official. Number 1. Number 2, they recommended hydration screening alongside COVID-19 testing. Sounds like a good match. Can we do that at least? You know, when folks are getting delivered this new medication, giving them a recommendation to also make sure that they're getting adequately hydrated, because it's the very basis of our immune function. And also they noted attention to hydration holds potential to reduce COVID-19 mortality and disparities via at least 5 pathways simultaneously. So what is the intervention here? Drink water proactively. Make it a ritual. I'm a big proponent of first thing in the morning when you get up, taking an inner bath, right? We take an external bath, right, to get ready for the world, or an external shower, but isn't the inside more important? Health is from the inside out. And when we're sleeping, that's likely the longest time that we're going without hydration for a lot of folks. And there's a tremendous, I'm talking again, trillions upon trillions of metabolic processes taking place that are accumulating waste. You know, there's a lot of metabolic waste that need to get removed from our system. And you'll probably notice in the morning, urine is more concentrated, and we're helping to flush these metabolic wastes out when we drink water to start the day. Plus, we get this added benefit seen in peer-reviewed evidence of something called water-induced thermogenesis, where we get this metabolic boost from simply drinking water. In the study, the one that I'm talking about, 17 ounces was that barometer. So drinking somewhere in the ballpark when you first wake up in the morning, you know, within that first 20 minutes, ideally, somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 25 to, that's where I'm at, 25, maybe even 30 ounces of water, depending on your makeup, depending on your needs, to start your day by getting your body hydrated before the busyness of the day takes over. What can we actually do to make ourselves more resilient against stress and adversity? The first way, number 1, and this is backed by researchers at Harvard Medical School who reported findings that strength training provides an opportunity to overcome obstacles in a controlled, predictable environment, which they found has the capacity to dramatically increase mental resilience. So being able to strength train in this controlled, predictable environment is then able to outpicture itself in the world as more mental resilience. And now the question is, why is that? Well, when you lift weights, yes, you're training your muscles, but you're also training your brain and your nervous system. Strength training has a remarkable influence on our nervous system. Part of the recovery process isn't just about recovering from the micro tears in our muscles. We're also recovering our nervous system. And this is a big part if we're looking at somebody who's doing powerlifting, for example. And this isn't about which flavor of this is going to be most effective, whether it's powerlifting or strength training, which there's a difference between the two. But if you're doing max lifts, this is why the next day you can't come back more than likely and do another max lift if you just did one the day before, whether it's a max deadlift, bench press, whatever the case might be. It's not necessarily that your muscles are suddenly unable to do the thing. It's that the nervous system has to recalibrate itself and heal, because it's really in training your entire system and encoding your system to be physiologically and psychologically capable, aware that stress you just undertook, not only can you do it and supersede it, but I want you, your body, this is the instructions from your body and your brain. I want you to be strong enough that if you're faced with this challenge again, not only can you do it, you're going to be able to do it and have more left in the tank. All right. That's really the overlooked benefit of strength training, is that it's not just, again, not just training and making you physically stronger from a muscular standpoint, but also how it makes you stronger by improving the tone and the capacity of your nervous system. The process of lifting weights is in essence creating a safe stress or a structured stress that elicits an adaptive response. To put this in a category, using the lexicon that we have today, lifting weights provides a hormetic stressor. Right? It's a hormetic stressor. So we tend to have this very black and white perception about stress. Stress bad. Hulk smash, stress bad. But stress isn't all bad. All right. As a matter of fact, just about anything in life has some form of stress that is riding along with it. All right. We require stress in order to function. Even our cells replicating, it is a stressful process for our cells to do that job. Stress is not inherently good or bad. And as a matter of fact, again, stress is what's encouraging life to move forward, our development. And the very good example of seeing this firsthand is the development of our bodies getting physically stronger by taking advantage of a physical stress, for example. The body continues to move forward and adapt when it's presented with stress. And the same thing with our immune system, same thing with our cardiovascular system. The list goes on and on. Now, here's the rub. If, for example, we're not allowed or able to recover from said stress, so we get that exercise input, a hormetic stressor is a stress that we are exposed to that makes us better when we are allowed to recover. That's the key. So if you're just hammering away, beating your body up for hours a day, every day, you're not going to be able to have a healthy adaptation to that stress. So it's the recovery period as well that is incredibly valuable. But we first need the trigger, right? So the lifting weights, the strength training is the trigger that sets off that reaction. It's pushing that button down on that catapult that then moves us forward. But we have to have that process of recovery, so adapting to said stress. Again, I want you to take on this label of a safe stress or a structured stress, where we are proactively giving ourselves this stress input and thereby making our body more resilient to outside forces, making our nervous system more resilient to outside external forces. All right? Your brain and your nervous system is facing that challenge along with you, with your muscles. We just think about it in terms of muscle. All right? And I'm conjuring up Diana Ross songs right now. I Want Muscle. Shout out to Diana Ross. All right? Or Olivia Newton-John. Physical. You know what I'm talking about. These are the things conjuring up for me. We think it's that out picturing with the muscle. But what's really working along with us is your brain and your nervous system. Your brain is there really not just coaching you through the process, but your brain obviously is controlling what your muscles are doing in the first place. And so your brain is there with you facing the challenge. Your nervous system is there with you facing the challenge, getting stronger and more resilient as well. And again, the Harvard researchers affirm that this then outpictures itself in the external world, making you more resilient to mental factors, to stressors out there. All right, so you create this structured stress, safe stress, makes you more capable and ready to handle what the world is throwing at you. All right. So how do we really leverage this? Well, again, we're looking at strength training specifically in this instance. And what does that look like? This means lifting weights, right? So squats, deadlifts, bench press, lat pull downs, pull ups, pushing and pulling with our upper and lower body. But this can also mean utilizing our body weight for these exercises, right? And we can, especially if we're just getting started, these are all incredibly viable things for us to do. Even advanced folks, you can make things more challenging. So this can go from a body weight squat to a goblet squat where you hold a dumbbell in front of you, to holding a couple of dumbbells, to, if we get really advanced, this is, I'm just saying in the context of not even being in the gym with a barbell on your back, let alone, that can really elicit some of the best response as far as our nervous system and muscle development. But what if we're moving forward in that body weight paradigm? Well, then we can get to single leg squats, right? Pistol squats. We can use our own body for the resistance. So when I say strength training, this doesn't just mean you need to be throwing weights around, all right? But that resistance, our body and gravity, that in and of itself, wow, like you can get an incredible structured stress without any rules. You don't need equipment, no excuses, none of that. It's just, if you've got a body, you've got a gym. If you've got a body, you have the capacity to make yourself physically and mentally stronger. And this is the time more than ever to do it. I want you to be a warrior out here. I want you to be strong and capable and courageous and able to deal with all of the turbulence that's happening in the world. We have to proactively get ourselves stronger right now. And that means getting ourselves physically stronger as well. And if you think about the concept or the outpicturing of muscle on our frames, it's literally like a defense, right? We don't build up the pecs just to bounce them up and down. That's not why we do it, right? We're building, it's kind of like a protective shield over your heart. Through our evolution, stuff was wild out here, all right? Facing off against animals, facing off against other tribes, whatever the case might be. You're building up, having that muscle is a protective thing on your frame. It's like armor, all right? It's really remarkable when we start to think about what are the actual utility value of things like this, that we just, again, we think in terms of Instagram model or magazine cover, those type of things. No, this is something that we were gifted with. We've evolved to enact these things to make us more resilient. This term survival of the fittest, like this is another dimension of looking at that. So again, strength training doesn't have to be lifting weights per se, but just having a mechanism of resistance. And now here's the thing. If we can get a variety of these things, this is even better because it's a variety of stressors to adapt to. Have you ever noticed, even if you've been fit in a certain thing, right? You're really acclimated to doing a certain type of workout. If you do a completely different type of workout, so maybe you go and you do the 3x10 sets at the gym, 3 sets of 10, 4 or 5 exercises, but then suddenly you work out with somebody and you do some supersets where you're doing push up, then immediately going over to a seated row, right? Back to back. And you do a bunch of supersets. Maybe you do 5 different types of supersets and you're cooked. Maybe even do less. Maybe the workout is half as long, but you're sweating more and just like, man, I'm in good shape, but this workout is kicking my butt. Or you do yoga and you do a different type of yoga. And you're just like, man, like this is really kicking my butt. And you're acclimated to that category, but that specific one. And it's not that it's harder on you physically, it's harder on your nervous system because you're doing something different. That's the thing. And so, again, change it up, add in some variety, especially right now. Try something new, add in a little bit more unconventional training. Because we live in unconventional times. Now, this is another important tenet here with resistance training, strength training, and becoming more resilient against stress. This study was published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology, and it revealed that lifting weights helped to reduce symptoms of anxiety for study participants. Now, if we look at resilience, if we look at being able to overcome stress, Anxiety can be something that acts as an anchor and makes it more difficult to rise over that wall, to rise over that obstacle. Anxiety, these are words that we've created to label symptoms or label an experience. Anxiety, there isn't one flavor of it. And it's not that it's bad, but the word itself has created so much psychological stigma that when the word comes up, it's just this bad thing. And we've talked about this with some of the most renowned experts in the world in psychology, like Dr. Susan David and her work out of Harvard, and understanding that the feeling or the experience of anxiety is giving us valuable feedback. And it can be utilized as a mechanism to help to essentially uncover what actions or new ways of thinking we can evolve to get ourselves from this feeling that we describe as anxiety, right? The anxiety is there giving us some valuable feedback. Now, what that feedback is could be a myriad of things. This could be an anxiety surrounding, social interactions and connections. It could be anxiety around, health. It could be anxiety around work stuff, family stuff. There's many different flavors of it. But oftentimes our feelings, they've been medicalized and we don't honor them anymore. And we're so external in our world and external in our inputs, in our control, the things that are controlling our thinking, that we don't often turn within and ask, what is this feeling of anxiety trying to teach me? What is this feeling trying to guide me towards? What action or perspective shift is this anxiety trying to guide me towards? Right? So feeling more empowered within our emotions and understanding that these are our emotions. These are ours. And there's nothing inherently bad about them. The issue comes in when they debilitate us and we're not given tools to have this introspection and also tools of resiliency so that it doesn't even get its hook so deep into us in the first place. And this is what we see in this particular study. Again, this was published in Frontiers in Psychology, revealing that lifting weights help reduce symptoms of anxiety for study participants. And also, health psychologist Kelly McGonigal, that we had the honor of having on the Model Health Show, shared with us these remarkable changes that take place in the brain as a result of exercise. All right, now this is opening up the box of exercise to a lot more than just strength training, because again, I'm talking about today what is clinically proven, specifically making us more resilient against stress and adversity. I want to really hit that note of strength training, but really all forms of movement can, especially when we do things that are a little bit more intense, and it creates shifts in our brain that she noted to, yes, make us more resilient against the effects of stress. And this is what her new research found. It actually sensitizes the brain for more pleasure. It actually makes us more sensitive to pleasure. Right now, we're the opposite. So many people in our society, we're far more sensitized to more stress. We're far more sensitized to fear. And our brain is really just hot and cooking and looking for those feelings and very reactive to it. It's like a live wire. Whereas we can create a live wire for pleasure and joy. And our brain starts to sync up and look for it. And a little bonus here, when we're looking at stress and the impact of exercise, a big part of stress is how it can literally create tunnel vision. When we're in a heightened state of stress, when that sympathetic nervous system is running high, it literally changes our focus. Our pupils change, and our senses, our vision literally becomes more hyper-focused, but in a very limited range. And we talked about this with neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman out of Stanford recently on the Model Health Show. And intense stress and challenge can also create psychological tunnel vision. And that's another aspect. So it creates a physical tunnel vision and a psychological tunnel vision. And what I mean by that is that when we're faced with intense stress and challenge and adversity, we have this tendency to go from many options to few options. And oftentimes from many options to only one option, right? We have to, this is the one way, we got to run, we got to do this, we got to hide, whatever the case might be, right? We go from where there's a will, there's 10,000 ways to there's one way. And I'm just going to keep hammering away at this one way, this one, instead of going around the obstacle under it, I can only go through, and we keep hitting our head against the wall. So psychological stress and adversity can have a tendency to create psychological tunnel vision where we are not seeing all of the possible ways to overcome said adversity, which I'm telling you, there's so many ways to overcome the challenges in our lives, so many ways. But that creativity begins to get diminished. Now, here's a little resource for that. A Stanford University study found that the act of literally walking away from the problem, i.e. going for a short walk, was able to increase creative inspiration by an average of 60% for test subjects versus sitting. Literally walking away from the problem increases something they defined as creative inspiration. The effect they noted was evident while and shortly after walking anywhere between 5 and 16 minutes. The enhancement was specific to a flavor of creativity called divergent thinking. We had psychological tunnel vision because of the stress, going for a walk, walking away from the problem, moving our bodies, created divergent thinking, more creative ways to work around said obstacle to the goal. Unconventional thinking, ideas that might not have even seemed obvious. We're so creative. We have so much capacity for resourcefulness, but sometimes we get limited when stress is able to get on top of us and make us close ourselves off, physiologically contracting and getting tunnel vision, and psychological tunnel vision. Having this in our back pocket, and I'm being 1,000 with you, sometimes it's not been easy for me to just unplug, walk away. If I'm working on a particular project, whatever the case might be, I have that tendency towards like, I'm getting this done. I'm locked, I'm getting it done. But without fail, every time I walk away, just go for a 15-minute walk, I come back just like ideas popping. All right? Ideas popping. So, strength training. Right now, let's get ourselves stronger and more resilient to have the capacity and strength to not just face the obstacles in our world right now, but to supersede them, to overcome them. We're going to move on to number 2 here on our 5 proven ways to make you more resilient against stress and adversity. And number 2 is cryotherapy. Yes, cryotherapy has been found to increase the activity of brown adipose tissue, a type of fat that burns fat. Yes, has been found to accelerate recovery from intense exercise. But what's remarkable about it, for our intents and purposes, is how cold exposure can increase your resilience in the face of stress. A study published in the peer-reviewed journal QJM, Monthly Journal of the Association of Physicians, investigated the antioxidant-based stress response in cold water swimmers versus a control group of healthy subjects who didn't engage in cold water exposure. Their definition of adaptation in this study is: adaptation to oxidative stress is an improved ability to resist the damaging effects of reactive oxygen species resulting from pre-exposure to a lower dose, unquote. So pre-exposing ourselves to stress builds up this antioxidant capacity to then buffer the damaging effects of reactive oxygen species. So physiologically, if we're talking about what's happening with our internal environment, when we're faced with excessive stress and adversity, the stress response is a catabolic process. So we know that there's resulting stress hormones and the like, but also there's an uptick in reactive oxygen species. These are elements that are well noted to be connected with accelerated aging of our bodies. All right. So stress, and we have these things we think about in terms of like just popular culture, popular ideas that, stress kills, or you can tell when somebody's lived a stressful life, they age prematurely. So these are real things, and we can actually do something about it by utilizing cold exposure. In this study, after obtaining blood samples from the winter swimmers and examining their antioxidant defense systems, they determined the swimmers developed, quote, an adaptive response to repeated oxidative stress, and postulated as a new basic molecular mechanism of increased tolerance to environmental stress, unquote. This process increases the tolerance for stress in the external world, outside of the cold water. When they come outside of the cold water, it makes them more resilient to the external world. Another thing that we talked about with Dr. Andrew Huberman was when he shared that when you choose to expose yourself to cold water, even a cold shower, it enacts a physiological stress response, and it elicits a dopamine release. So the release of these feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters into our system are enacted as well. You've cut the cold water on while you stand there for a minute or two, even maybe 30 seconds to start. Then you shut the water off, or even shift it to warm water. You're dousing your system with feel-good hormones on top of the stress response. He shared that this stress response conditioning can dramatically increase resiliency to stress in our day-to-day lives, because when a stressful situation occurs, you're better able to recognize that state. Your body and your brain is now better able to recognize that stressful state. It's like, whoa, this is me feeling alert. I've been here before. I can handle this. In that cold exposure, you can extract a couple of different physiological benefits. In one way, you can relax into the moment. With that cold water coming down on you in the form of a shower, or if we're doing a cold water, an ice bath, or getting ourselves into cold water, you can relax into that moment. You can control your breathing, and you can exercise your ability to stay calm under pressure. Or you can do what seems like the exact opposite. You can white knuckle the situation. You can express yourself however you want to the fact that you don't like this, you don't like what's happening, and you can fight just a little bit longer. You can keep going just a little bit longer. And the fact that you don't like it doesn't deter you. It won't deter you. So again, there's two modalities we can step into this with, where we relax into the moment, we focus on our breathing, we exercise our ability to be calm under pressure, or we can just get into it and just fight for that extra moment, because both approaches and everything in between will condition your body and brain to better adapt and persevere through stress. Now, this is coming from Huberman Lab at Stanford University, all right? And these things, again, we would think are sort of new age or novel, but in reality, these are things that literally for thousands of years, humans have been utilizing cold thermogenesis or cryotherapy, cold exposure, for a variety of health reasons that are well established. Today, we're utilizing our conventional science to affirm what our ancestors have been doing for a long time. So this is yet another way that we can, again, based on real peer-reviewed data, we can make ourselves more resilient to stress and adversity right now. And this is a low-cost implement. Again, you don't need a membership somewhere. You can just literally, and the key words here he said, when you choose it, it's different. I've had to take a cold shower when I was a kid because we didn't pay that bill. That's a whole different, that is just terrible, right? There's no part of me that was like, I'm doing this, when you choose, psychologically, when you choose to expose yourself to something that's so uncomfortable, man, like that really, as the data shows, it helps to build resiliency. It's just like, I've been here before. These are the nutrients that are needed to build your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters to make all of the magic happen. You can get the fanciest, pansiest mattress you can ever imagine, the pillow with the most flex and fluffiness and shoots out rainbows, whatever it is. You can get all of this fancy stuff, get the blackout curtains. All those things are wonderful. But if you don't have the raw materials to build your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, our sleep is going to continue to suffer. So this is why this is important. And also, when identifying these nutrients, what are the best foods to find them in? So we're going to talk about that. And we'll also cover how commonly consumed foodstuffs, in addition to those, actually damage your sleep quality, plus a whole lot more. And if this is your first time tuning into the Model Health Show, again, my name is Shawn Stevenson. I'm the author of the USA Today national bestseller, Eat Smarter, and the international bestselling book, Sleep Smarter. And again, on this episode, we're going to dive into specific foods that we need to be eating on a regular basis to improve our sleep quality. So first things first, we're going to start at the top. And I want to begin with why focusing on good sleep nutrition is so beneficial. When we think about diet and nutrition here in this culture, it's generally in the context of weight loss and weight management. That's generally what we relate to psychologically, nutrition and diet. But our sleep quality itself is one of the most powerful controllers of our metabolism, specifically in the domain of body weight and metabolism. Researchers at Stanford University found that insufficient sleep can reduce levels of the satiety hormone leptin that has big influences on your overall metabolism. And also, sleep deficiency increases the level of the hunger hormone ghrelin. All right, ghrelin is really the captain of the team of our hunger-related hormones that drive us to eat more. So being sleep deprived suppresses our satiety hormones and increases our hunger hormones. A recent study conducted by researchers at the University of Chicago revealed that our fat cells themselves need sleep too. All right, our fat cells need sleep. The study recruited healthy, lean test subjects, and each volunteer went through 2 study conditions. In one part of the study, they spent 8.5 hours a night in bed for 4 consecutive nights. In another part of the study, they spent 4.5 hours in bed. So they took away 4 hours of their sleep for 4 nights. Food intake in both phases was exactly the same and strictly controlled. All right. They're in a ward study. They're monitoring everything. They're eating the exact same amount of food on the morning after their normal nights of sleep and on the morning after their 4 nights of sleep deprivation. All right. The morning after the walk of shame. Each volunteer was given an intravenous glucose tolerance test, which measures their total body insulin sensitivity. In addition, the researchers performed a biopsy, removing abdominal fat cells from the volunteers, and they measured how those fat cells specifically responded to the role of insulin. And after 4 nights of sleep deprivation, their total body insulin response was suppressed. It decreased by an average of 16%. Plus, and this is the most important part, specifically their fat cells themselves, again, that they took out via biopsy, their fat cells themselves their insulin sensitivity decreased by 30%. All right, so what does this mean? First of all, insulin resistance, this lack of insulin sensitivity, a classic sign of insulin resistance is carrying around more abdominal belly fat. But what does this mean is specifically for these numbers? This reduction in insulin sensitivity is comparable to the difference between cells from a lean person and cells from someone who is obese. And again, these were lean, healthy test subjects who suddenly their fat cells were functioning as if they became obese in 4 days, just 4 days of sleep deprivation. Or another comparison here is somebody without diabetes. That's what their markers look like initially, becoming somebody with diabetes. That's how their fat cells were actually responding as if they had diabetes within 4 days. All right, this is remarkable. And this is, again, these controlling factors for our metabolism that is not talked about in different diet programs. It's not talked about the necessity of optimizing our sleep for so many different things that have to do with our health and well-being. And to put the cherry on top, one more study looking at how sleep impacts our body composition. And this one is incredibly eye-opening. And I really helped to push this into the interwebs because it's so right to the point. This study, published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, conducted by researchers at the University of Chicago, followed overweight but healthy volunteers to study the impact that sleep deprivation has on their metabolism. They put them on a carefully controlled, reduced calorie diet and monitored them for 14 days during one phase of the study, allowing them to get 8.5 hours of sleep. All right, now they keep them on the same exact diet for the next phase of the study, and they sleep deprive them. They pull away 3 hours of sleep. So now they're getting 5.5 hours of sleep for 14 days, and they track the results. Now, again, they're on the exact same diet, but in one phase, they're getting adequate sleep. In another phase, they're being sleep deprived. After compiling all of the data, they found that when folks were adequately rested, they lost 55% more body fat eating the exact same diet. The changes were remarkable. And the question is why? How can sleep have such a powerful effect on our body composition and our weight? And a big part of that is that our sleep is a major controller of our hormones. And when we're talking about sleep quality in of itself, the same thing is true. Your hormones and neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers sending these metabolic DMs to make all of the magic happen, to keep all of the cells in your cellular community that make up your body on the same page. So clearly our sleep is a major controller of our metabolism, absolutely. And to optimize our sleep, our nutrition is of the utmost importance. So to see how this interaction between nutrition and sleep actually takes place, look no further than the incredible world of our microbiome. So now we're going to dive in deep. We're going to get up in them guts and take a look at what's happening in relationship to our microbiome and the sleep connection. Your tiny gut bacteria play a gigantic role in regulating your sleep cycles. A recent study published in the journal Sleep Medicine discovered that negative changes to your microbiome can have substantial detrimental effects on the quality of your sleep. Again, negative changes to your microbiome can have substantial detrimental effects to the quality of your sleep. And what's more, the researchers discovered that poor sleep quality can also have detrimental effects on your microbiome. They literally feed into each other, and you can get caught in a vicious circle that so many people are experiencing, and they have no idea why. Again, they're getting the fanciest, pansiest mattress. They're getting the best pillow. They're getting the heavy blanket, right? They're getting the blanket that suffocates you. What is it called? What are they called? Weighted blankets. They're getting the weighted blanket. Makes it feel like they're in the womb again, but it's still not working. All right. They can't even get smothered to sleep. All right. And shout out to the weighted blankets. I think they're fantastic for some people. But we're not addressing the root cause. What's actually controlling the process of sleep itself. And it has so much to do with our microbiome and our nutrition. Their report demonstrated that as the microbiome is negatively altered and sleep quality is reduced, there's a direct reduction in our ability to switch between different mental tasks, something called cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility. So to make this clear, when our microbiome sleep connection is disrupted, it damages our sleep and damages our cognitive ability as well. And again, I dive into that in depth in Eat Smarter because we're looking at our metabolism. How can we eat to optimize our metabolism? And again, taking people behind the scenes and teaching people how their metabolism actually works, but also what are nutrients, specific foods that improve our cognitive performance. That's what the smarter part of Eat Smarter is really all about. Now, as mentioned, to dive in deeper into them guts, to talk about how this actually works, I'm going to read you a powerful tidbit from Eat Smarter. One of the major reasons that our gut health has such a profound impact on our sleep is due to the sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters that are produced and or stored in the gut. Take serotonin, for example. Serotonin is well noted to promote positive mental and emotional health, while low levels of serotonin are associated with anxiety and depression. On top of that, serotonin also plays a major part in sexual function, bone health, regulating the movement of your digestive system, and sleep quality. A 2007 report found that low levels of serotonin can contribute to insomnia. Serotonin is a potent neurotransmitter with many jobs, and even though it's often associated with things happening in our brains, the vast majority of serotonin is actually located in our gut. Approximately 90% of the human body's total serotonin is located in the gastrointestinal tract. And scientists at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, reported that there are specific bacteria that interact with the cells in the gut that produce and secrete serotonin for us. These cells, called enterochromaffin cells, are interacting with your bacteria cells all of the time. And if the north pole of your microbiome goes south, the only thing coming down your chimney will be a big box of sleep problems. Not only does serotonin improve sleep on its own accord, one of the most important things your body does with serotonin is use it to make your number one sleep regulating hormone, melatonin. Yes, melatonin is glorified as a, quote, sleep hormone, but it's really so much more than that. It's involved in regulating your body's circadian timing system, influencing when various hormones are released throughout the day and night, mental energy, digestive function, etc., as well as regulating your blood pressure, body temperature, cortisol levels, antioxidant defenses, and immune function. Saying melatonin is just a sleep hormone is like saying Michael Jordan is just good at putting a ball into a circle. Now, to reiterate and to step away a little bit from the text, melatonin is playing an enormous amount of roles in the human body, really regulating our what we call this biological clock. And what that means, this is how we're literally synced up with nature. Our hormones are getting produced at certain times during the day, neurotransmitters, our digestion, everything about us, every one of our cells has a little biological clock, this circadian rhythm. It sounds kind of a little bit meta and kind of weird or even a little woo-woo, but it's not. This is how we're designed. But the interesting thing about humans is we can pretend we're not a part of nature. All right, we can hide out, we can manufacture whatever time of day we want. But the human body is constantly looking to sync itself with the diurnal and nocturnal patterns of the earth itself. We're connected to it no matter what. And so when I was in college, I was taught that melatonin, really, again, it was a sleep hormone. And also I was taught that melatonin is produced in the pineal gland of the brain. End of story. Next chapter. Turn the page. That was it. Very, very rudimentary description of something that is so remarkable. Today, we know that melatonin is also synthesized in other cells outside of the pineal cells, such as bone marrow cells, your lymphocytes, and most remarkably, cells in the gut. Research published in the World Journal of Gastroenterology revealed that the human digestive tract could contain more than 400 times more melatonin than the pineal gland at any given time. Do you understand this? I was taught melatonin is produced in the pineal gland. That's what everybody hears. We have 400 times more melatonin in our gut than in our brain. We think that sleep is a head thing, but it has a lot to do with what's happening in our bellies. Now, to really drive this point home, a new study that I broke down in Eat Smarter, cited in Frontiers in Psychiatry, peer-reviewed journal, purported that our microbiome helps to regulate our sleep and mental state through the action of the microbiome gut-brain axis. Your microbiome is at the very root of your sleep wellness. And this leads us to our first list of foods to improve your overall sleep quality. Foods that are rich in prebiotic fibers, resistant starch, and probiotics. This first list that I want to share with you is coming right from the pages of Eat Smarter, are also foods that are rich in potassium. And I did this very specifically because a study cited in the journal Sleep found that potassium can help improve sleep efficiency, meaning that you go through your sleep cycles more effectively. All right, it's not necessarily about sleeping a certain amount of hours. It's the quality of that sleep. And potassium is one of those key drivers, this important electrolyte in optimizing your sleep cycles themselves. And also, the researchers found, and again, this was published in the journal Sleep, that potassium helped to reduce wake after sleep onset. So meaning that you wake up less often. Now, when we're talking about potassium and also hitting those categories of resistant starch, probiotics, prebiotic fibers, we've got a diversity here. When you think about potassium, a lot of folks think about bananas, all right? B-A-N-A-N-A-S is bananas, all right? Bananas are often touted as the best source of potassium, which, funny enough, they actually happen to be a very high source of resistant starch that helps to feed our friendly microbes that have a big relationship to regulating our sleep cycles. All right, resistant starch is something you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the upcoming years. Now, here's the key. There's a certain caveat with this. When the banana is not ripe, when it's a green banana, it's very high in resistant starch. But as it gets more ripe, it goes from a higher starch content to higher sugar content. All right, it's that conversion process. It gets sweeter. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never had a craving for a green banana. All right. If I've ever seen anybody just crack open a green banana, I probably thought some weird things about them. All right. And also that little part of the banana, that little brown part, you know, it's just kind of tastes like real chalky and weird. Some people call it the devil's anus, but it's not very, that part as well we can do without. All right. Green bananas and the devil's anus. Sorry. So the green banana, as it gets more and more ripe, I think that they call the devil's anus was in Thor Ragnarok as well. Like when it was like some portal in the sky, but don't quote me on that. Anyways, I just had a whole stream of thoughts from that. And shout out to WandaVision. Are you checking out WandaVision? That's going down right now. Very strange, but it's the MCU. I trust you guys. I trust you. All right, so what we can do here is maybe you add a little bit of a green banana to a smoothie. It's going to have benefits for your sleep as far as the potassium is concerned, and also as a resistant starch to feed the friendly microbes. Or there's even like green banana flour that, you know, again, you want to get high quality, organic if you can, that folks are, you know, you can add to smoothies and baked goods and all kinds of creative ways you can add it in. But if you're not into that, there's so many other options. Okay, so just staying in this lane with potassium as an emphasis and also having some other benefits for our microbes. So a potassium that really supersedes bananas, and you can do without the worry about the sugar or the not tastiness of a green banana, is avocados. All right, avocado. A little fun fact, the kind of one of the roots of the word avocado, it means testicle fruit. You didn't hear that from me though. All right, grows in trees and pears. Dangle, never mind. All right, this is taking a turn. I didn't know we would turn this direction, but again, avocados, great. And they're actually, funny enough, they're great for your reproductive system. Many benefits there as well. So avocados are another great source. Plus, you're going to get some prebiotic fibers there too. And, and again, we're going through lists of foods that have proven benefits in improving our sleep quality. So we've got avocados, green leafy vegetables, incredible source of potassium. And also we're getting some of these prebiotic fibers. All right. In this category of prebiotic fibers to feed our healthy microbes, our quote friendly flora, because you could take all the probiotics you want. They're not going to be able to colonize and to proliferate in your system and actually stay and give you benefit if you don't have the prebiotic foods that specific strains of bacteria need to eat. If they don't have their preferred food source, they're just going to leave. They're not welcome. All right. So we've got to feed them their preferred food source. And pretty much every real food is going to have some type of prebiotic benefit for some strain of bacteria. All right. Because when you're eating a food, when you're eating a blueberry, when you're eating an avocado, you're eating the avocado's microbiome. Just think about that. It's remarkable. We just see these things that just some random entity over there is food, but it is a living thing and it has its own microbiome and we're taking that on. It's remarkable, right? So as we're adding in more diversity of real foods, we're adding in, we don't have to just go and get a list of prebiotics, from a Google search, because it's going to be very limited in its scope and in the thought process is coming from the researchers. It's very limited. Like, oh, we know we got inulin here, whatever the case might be. So Jerusalem artichoke, garlic, onions, leeks. We know that that's on the list, but every real food has prebiotic potential. So avocados is another great source of potassium. Green leafy vegetables, as mentioned, sweet potatoes, great source of potassium. Sea veggies, oh my goodness, especially dulse. This is one of the most remarkable sources of potassium. All right, gram for gram, best source of potassium you're going to find is dulse. And also, they got these prebiotic capacities as well. On that lane, even if there's a beverage that's great with potassium, coconut water. All right, coconut water. I got put on a coconut water, man, what was that probably about 15 years ago. My mother-in-law, she would go to this world market and get these coconuts, these young coconuts. And I'm from Missouri. I never seen such things. I didn't get it at all. But, cracking those bad boys open, I had down to a science. You also feel like some kind of way about it, too. When you're cracking open that young coconut, you feel like, I don't know, like you could play, play a ukulele or whatever. Like, just hand it to me. Like, all of a sudden, you just got that skill. You don't, but you just feel it. So, yeah. Coconut water is another great source of potassium. And again, there's microbiome. You're consuming the microbiome of that coconut as well. So I don't want to be limited in our thinking of what prebiotics are. It's bigger than just this, what we call fiber. It's so much bigger and broader. Also, with resistant starch and potassium, white beans, all right, black beans. Some diet frameworks don't allow it. They don't allow it. And that's okay. But maybe for you, maybe your genes, maybe your ancestors for the past centuries have thrived by incorporating beans, and it's been specifically feeding strains of bacteria that have protected you against weight gain, against inflammation. However, maybe the beans are a causative factor for some related health issues, because they definitely can be. Of course, one of our most incredible guests, Dr. Stephen Gundry, multi New York Times bestselling author, brilliant physician. Oh my goodness, I love him so much. Such a great guy. He's seen incredible results. He wrote The Plant Paradox, and teaching people, he really brought to the market the understanding of these lectins, right? These plant poisons the plants have built into them to protect them, right? So, but there are ways, if they're done in traditional fashion, for example, like using a pressure cooker or soaking the beans. Like, people weren't just making random bread back in the day. When you hear about, these like scriptural references, oftentimes it's fermented, right? It's prepared in a way that's much more intentional versus today's like factory farming dwarf wheat, this, genetically manipulated, whatever that is. It's so far removed from how it's produced what we evolved with and also the way that it's prepared. Okay, shows up as Wonder Bread. I wonder why I have health problems, right? So anyways, white beans, black beans also fit into this category. Again, if it's right for you, preferably if they're soaked and or sprouted, cooked properly, it might be very helpful for you. Because again, Eat Smarter is a unifier of all the best diet frameworks. We provide solutions and strategies for everybody. Nobody is left out of the equation. All of these wonderful diet frameworks that are out there, they get results for patients. They absolutely do. But consistently, there's a large percentage of people who don't get the results. And that's because many of these frameworks can be very dogmatic and prevent you from having something that you need, and also encouraging you to eat something that might actually not really resonate with your system. All right. So we have to keep both of those in context. So moving on and looking at, again, rich sources of potassium. We're just starting here. This is the first list. It's the first list. And also probiotic/prebiotic capacities to support your microbes that help to create your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters. We also have yogurt is in this category. Again, clinically proven. It's a great source of potassium. And also we get in this conversation, what kind of yogurt? Well, obviously it's not Go-Gurt. We're not talking about Go-Gurt. You know, the squirtable, like artificial colored, like whatever, that stuff. Okay. So ideally we want to get full fat. And we talk about this in Eat Smarter, the nuances, whether you're doing the plant-based or, you know, the dairy-based, but we want to avoid, it should be coming from a source that's also consuming its normal diet. So ideally, if it's grass-fed, full fat, so it's actually the whole kit and caboodle, but also then there's plant-based versions of yogurt that are becoming very popular today. It doesn't have as much clinical evidence to its benefit, but tests are being done all the time. And I just want us to be able to have the data at hand that exists and use it if we deem it something good for us. And also in that camp, when we're talking about potassium, we've got fish like mackerel and salmon. They don't meet the prebiotic fiber rule necessarily, but they're also exceptional sources of potassium. So there's a wide spectrum of different foods. This is just some. We definitely, please hear me, you have to be consistent every day. Target something that has a good source of potassium because it's required to build your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters. All right, this electrolyte, because our bodies are largely running on this kind of electrical currency. It helps our cells to literally communicate. Our brain cells need electrolytes in order to communicate. Signal transduction. They cannot talk to each other unless we have adequate electrolytes. Okay, now next up, before we dive into more specific foods and nutrients we want to target, again, to build our sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters, even that's not going to matter much if we don't remove the cause, remove the things that are damaging our sleep-related hormones, neurotransmitters, and our microbes, our microbiome, that all of this associated activity is controlling our sleep quality on so many different levels that we've already covered. So we need to remove the cause of the problem, what can be hurting us. And so we're going to just go through a few of these. All of these are listed out in Eat Smarter. But peer-reviewed studies have shown that each of these have, again, proven detrimental impact on your gut bacteria. All right, the same gut bacteria that communicate with your cells in your gut, creating your sleep-related hormones and neurotransmitters. These are proven. Agricultural chemicals, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, rodenticides. Side means to kill. It means to kill, right? The suffix side means to kill, but it's not going to kill anything in you. It just kills the little pesties. You're made. We are more of these single-celled organisms than we are human cells by far. All right. Our microbiome is that. It's these very small entities that are very susceptible to chemical exposure. Most agricultural chemicals, the vast majority of the thousands of them, thousands approved for use for growing human food by our EPA, right? Environmental Protection Agency. Why are they allowing so much? I thought you were going to protect me. I'm part of the environment. EPA? Nah, it doesn't work like that. These organizations, we have to look out for ourselves and we have to encourage policy change. All right. So, but these chemicals, they're either estrogenic or neurogenic. So estrogenic, meaning that they disrupt the reproductive cycle of very small organisms. Or they're neurogenic, damaging the nervous system of these various, small organisms. And just say, again, something that I was kind of miseducated about in school is the nature of a bacteria cell, right? It's the single-celled organism, doesn't have a brain. It's not smart. Oh, now we know the bacteria communicate with each other. They respond to pain. They respond to changing conditions. That sounds very similar to a nervous system to me. We might call it something else. It's not human. But these things, now again, they're proven to cause significant damage to us. I talked about recently chlorpyrifos, one of the most widely used pesticides, and the multiple studies showing how it's caused significant brain damage to children. Pregnant mothers who are exposed to this chemical, again, approved by the EPA. It's red tape right now. It's supposed to be banned. It's at the Senate floor. It's at the courts, whatever. Why isn't it just gone? It's all of these politics, man. It's all these politics. And also skyrocketing rates of miscarriage, right? It's damaging the development of the nervous system of our babies. It's crazy, right? So to say that these things are damaging our microbiome, it shouldn't even be complicated to understand. Also, processed foods. What does that even mean? What is it? Trust the process. Not when it comes to food. Not when it comes to food. It's so far removed from anything that we're designed to eat over our countless centuries of evolution in this current form, right? We've got Homo erectus, right? Homo sapien. We're becoming Homo domesticus, right? We're like becoming this domesticated. I think about the album cover, Evolution of Robin Thicke. I don't know if it's like the evolving, and then we're kind of devolving. We're eating things in such a small window of our evolution that have never existed before. It's so far removed from actually being real food. It's just chemical and crazy processing to the degree that this corn ends up being put through so much manipulation that now we've got Captain Crunch. That Captain Crunch doesn't look a damn thing like corn, right? But it's derived from corn. Somehow, trust the process, not with this. Trust the process in life and other things, but not with food. Don't trust the process. But not to say, again, you can have, if you're into crunch berries, it's okay. But we want to make sure that that is the exception and not the rule. Myself, my family, where I come from, it's the rule. We'll just say if I have 30 close family members of mine growing up, 28 of them are obese. I grew up in this. This was just normal, all right? Knocking down, man, I'll eat a half a box of cereal easy. Like that's a regular. And don't let me get some good cereal, because a lot of times we had the off-brand stuff. I didn't get Captain Crunch. We had King Vitamin. True story. King Vitamin was not as tasty, all right? Some of the stuff was equal, it's comparable, all right? We had we didn't have Tony the Tiger. We had, I think it was like a polar bear, right? It wasn't Frosted Flakes. It was like Sugar Flakes with the polar bear. Polo the polar bear. They're good, right? He's changing the motto, everything. But anyways, this is just what we were inundated with. Nearly every meal that I ate was processed foods, and wonder why we were in such a poor state of health. These foods are also destroying our bacteria cascade and really feeding opportunistic pathogenic bacteria who look for weakness in our system. It's just how nature works. So these are the things destroying our microbiome, destroying our sleep quality. We want to be more cognizant of these things so that we can avoid them. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today. Viruses have actually helped us to evolve as humans. As a matter of fact, when the human genome was decoded, they found that the human gene itself is 8% virus.
Right.